Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Winter Food System Seminar. We're continuing our exploration of the topic of food rescue innovations. And today we're really excited to have Stefan Kalb, the CEO and founder of Shelf Engine here to talk about their really transformative work in the food retail industry. So Stefan, I'm going to pass it over to you. And again, thank you so much for being here today to share your experience.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me. Let me first share my screen and just confirm that you can see my screen. We're good. Okay, we're good to go. Awesome. And just to confirm also in terms of timing, I have 20 minutes to present. Is that roughly accurate, Alyssa?
Really 20 to 30 minutes.
20,
the
30
time
minutes,
that's left over will be used for Q&A.
Okay, perfect. I'm a talker, so that's a good thing to know.
No problem. And Stefan, if you'd like to, you're welcome to take questions either at the end or during the presentation, whatever you prefer.
Okay. What I will likely do in this scenario is I'll go ahead and present and then wait for questions towards the end. And what I'm going to do is this is going to be kind of action-packed for everybody, and I'll go a little bit fast. So if there's some stuff that you want me to kind of go back to later, I'm happy to do that. So first of all, I just want to say I'm honored to be speaking to all of you today. This course that you're in today is actually something that I wish I would have taken back when I was in school, as you'll hear shortly that when I started off my career in food, I had very little knowledge of how the entire food system worked. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a little bit about what is going on in the food system and what's happening specifically in grocery stores and why is there so much food waste there. I'll share a little bit about myself and what my company does, and then we'll geek out a little bit in terms of some forecasting and understanding how to figure out how to get the right amount of food into a grocery store. I'll have a couple case studies that'll be fun, and then of course we'll open for questions. So anyway, I'll go ahead and jump in. Excited to be chatting with all of you. Oh, and one thing I should mention too that's actually quite exciting, and this will be good in terms of my introduction, but my first company was actually a food production distribution company called Molly's. And we had a series of cafes, and one of them was actually on the university's campus inside the Henry. So, you know, very tightly linked to University of Washington. Really an honor to be speaking to all of you. But so anyway, I already started introducing myself, but I started my first company in my early 20s, which was a food production and distribution company. Grew that across the Pacific Northwest, and eventually sold it. And it took me about a decade to build this company. And along the way, I learned a tremendous amount about how food systems worked. But I had a particular amount of interest in terms of how food actually gets to the grocery store, and how do you actually forecast how much food should go into a grocery store. Now, my general assumption before I really knew anything about food systems is I thought, well, okay, you know, grocery stores in general, they operate really well, and maybe they like waste an apple here and there. And then when I started my first company, I learned that that was not the case at all. And it was through my experience of growing Molly's that I got to see what was happening in the back of a grocery store. And it was really striking, right, to be able to see these huge bins, these huge trash bins filled with food. And the most typical thing that you'd also see is these carts, these shopping carts, which the managers would take through the stores, and you would see this enormous amount of food, and they would roll into the back of the store to eventually be dumped out at the end of the day. And it was quite striking. This is kind of what got me so excited and so motivated to launch Shelf Engine. But before I talk about Shelf Engine, let's do a little back story on what's actually happening in the grocery industry. And we've got a little bit of history that's fun. And I like to share this story often because I think we don't realize, one, how good we have it here, and two, what is actually many times a source of our issues. So if we look back to one of the most famous grocery stories of all time, is when Boris Yeltsin was visiting the US. He was actually here to visit the Johnson Space Center. And on his way out of the Johnson Space Center, he was driving out, passes by a grocery store, and he insists that he goes in to go see this grocery store. And it's a Randall's grocery store. He walks in the grocery store and he walks it, and he's just blown away. And he thinks that the Americans are messing with him. Like, oh, they've staged this grocery store here, and they're just going to show off like how they can do these things, but it is not possible. And he has one famous quote there. He says, if the Russians knew what the Americans had here, we would have a revolution on our hands. Now, this is, you know, a really great story to share how amazing the American grocery system functions. Now, today around the world, you know, there's so many countries that have a really great grocery system, and arguably actually many countries have a superior system. But how did we get here? How is that possible? Even in 1990, when Boris Yeltsin was walking this Randall store, there came from this one kind of invention and change in the shift of how we think about grocery, which happened first in 1916 at a Piggly Wiggly's in Memphis, Tennessee. And this was the concept that instead of walking into a store and asking somebody behind a counter to get you something, you could walk into a store and grab your own items and then check out. And that was a fairly novel concept. And that's really when grocery took off, right? Now, what happened between grocery to, then versus today is that then you had a grocery store full of goods that would last a really long time. Versus today, the grocery store, 60% of the grocery store is fairly fresh food items, right? So fast forward to today and what is kind of going on. So I'll talk about this in a little bit more depth, but we're going to go over and talk about what is the core challenge of what's happening today in terms of our food system, and why do we have so much food waste in the grocery store. Then I'll be able to talk to you about what we do here at Shelf Engine, and then talk about these results and case studies. So jumping into the core challenge. The core challenge is the fact that you as a consumer want this shelf to be full. You want it to look beautiful. You want to have all these products available for you at all times. And you don't really want anything less than that. In fact, if we think about some of the things that have happened for us lately in the pandemic, when there's a lot of out of stocks, it's really annoying. We're kind of outraged, actually. We're used to having these full, beautiful shelves of available products that have the right shelf life on them and that we're able to buy. That's interesting. And if you layer on top of that, that as a consumer, you want these things, and you think about what it's like as an operator, there's three really difficult things as an operator. The first thing is, as of recent, and I think everybody's quite aware of this, is that we've got a lot of inflation. And inflation is pushing up these prices for producers. And the problem is that grocers take a while to catch up to these increases in terms of pricing. And so you have this situation where you have a push now on top of an industry that has very small margins. Now, the second thing that you have is you have a really tight labor market, right? There's literally grocery stores in this country today that are shutting down because they can't find staff to operate it. They literally can't open their doors in the morning because there's just not enough people who want to work there. And then finally, we have this huge pressure on e-commerce. So on e-commerce, we essentially have now over 10% of the grocery sales going through e-commerce. So this Piggly Wiggly's that was really just a little over 100 years ago, that was selling dry goods, it's kind of this novel concept. Today is this main way that we get food into our homes, and there is these huge pressures that are upon it, right? So we approach this and we say, okay, how do we think about this core challenge, and what is it that's really creating the biggest issue? And at the end of the day, we think about this main lever that grocery stores have, which is how much should I order? And if you think about the shelf that you want to have full and all this product availability, and you have these three big challenges that grocers are dealing with, at the end of the day, the big solve for them is to figure out how much to order in a given grocery store. Now, you think that it's fairly trivial. You look at a store and you think, okay, well, we'll just kind of figure out what needs to be ordered roughly for every SKU. Well, that's rather complicated. It's rather complicated because the average grocery store you're going into has over 40,000 SKUs in it. So if you just want to make 40,000 independent decisions every day in terms of how much to order, that's going to be fairly challenging. The other thing is that it's really easy to get it wrong. You can either get it wrong one way, which is then you have a bunch of out of stocks, you didn't order enough, or you got it wrong the other way, and you essentially have too much product in the store, and now you have a bunch of waste. The industry term, obviously, shrink for this product that is either wasted or has gone missing, or we don't understand what's actually happened to it, is the balance to the problem. So, okay, how are grocery stores dealing with this today, and how are they approaching this? Given how kind of big of a problem it is, there's kind of 4 methodologies. So you have here on the very left, it's called a CAO, computer assisted ordering. Most large grocery stores that you shop at today, say a Whole Foods or a Kroger or a Walmart, use a CAO, right? Now, some stores are using some mobile apps that are kind of smaller size mobile apps. And then many will use spreadsheets, and then many will guess. Now, the reality is that even though the majority of orders today are going through a CAO, which is essentially a scan gun in the store, they go and they scan each one of the SKUs they need to order. The person who's using that scan gun has a prediction on there of how much they need to order. That prediction is not good. It's got a bunch of failure points in there, which makes it so that they basically have to guess. And the entire industry knows this. They know that they basically have this solution to order products, but it's very much based on guessing. And in the places where they don't really have the capacity to guess, they don't have enough labor, they'll just put in some sort of automation and just say, order 5 of these all the time. Or go ahead and reorder these when sales haven't really happened for X number of days because we assume it's out of stock. Very rudimentary systems. And this is how majority of the stores you're going to are getting replenished. And that's causing a tremendous amount of waste. On top of that, even though the CAO is the main methodology that grocery stores are ordering with, they have a really hard time with the complexity of the entire supply chain. Because the products that come in have varying shelf lives, because they come in and they have different lead times, they come in different size of master packs and sub master packs, and they'll sit in the warehouse in a different amount of time, and they have different delivery schedules. They have different planograms to get into the stores. The CIOs don't really do a good job of considering all these factors. And it's really quite complicated to get all these different factors consideration. Now, I'm going to conclude in terms of the core challenge. As you can see that I've kind of like laid out all these different pieces. There's this final kind of piece to the core challenge that is holding back the grocery industry, that grocery executives have been fighting for decades and they don't understand how to solve it, which is that in a store, there are 2 challenges, which is to try to figure out how much product is going to sell in a given day and how much product is in your store. The average grocery store today in the United States does an full inventory of their store on average about twice a year. That means they have an actual accurate portrayal of what's in their store only twice a year. After that, their estimated inventory to what the actual inventory in the store is deviates very quickly. And so you have these CAOs that are dependent on the fact that they think that there's a certain amount of product in the store and there just isn't. And it's all these different factors that I just talked about that leads to this inventory uncertainty. And this inventory uncertainty leads to humans doing more ordering, to more of the issues happening in the store, and you kind of get into this vicious cycle where of all the grocery stores in the US today, really the majority of the products and how much is being ordered is kind of a rough guess. Okay, so where do we go from here? If we have such massive waste numbers in the US, and that part I haven't talked about yet, but the reality is that the majority of grocers are actually underreporting waste. The waste numbers are much worse than we actually think they are across the country. And we're looking at categories like the most highly perishable categories like produce, and bakery, and deli, meat and seafood. They have waste numbers into the 20 percentile, 30 percentile ranges, depending on the store. And sometimes we get to see really, the actual performance of all these stores. We see waste percentages in above 50 percentile for some of the worst performing stores. So you literally will walk into the store and be like, okay, this store throws out more food than it actually sells, which is insane to think that could be the case today. Okay, so how do we essentially make an impact and make a shift here? And so we have a very unique solution as an organization. And I'll say that as executives, as the government, as many people have been thinking about food waste and how to make a really big impact, software keeps coming up as a solution. Hey, we need better software. But what does that mean? And how do we actually address the idea that we just need to have better software? What if these CAOs were better? So a lot of organizations try to deploy these better CAOs, and they haven't really made meaningful progress to date to get there. So we decided to take a very different approach, which is going to deliver some interesting results in this process, and I'll kind of uncover for you what happened here there. So Shelf Engine does this wild thing, which is not only do we forecast and automate the ideal order, but we guarantee the results to the store. So we say, hey store, you've been having 20% waste. We will guarantee results of 10%. So the way that materializes and the way that works is that we actually take on the ordering for the store, submit the orders to the vendors, and we pay the vendors for everything they deliver to the store, but we only charge the store for the product that actually sells. For that service, we charge a fee on every SKU. I'll do a little breakdown of that in a second, but I want to share kind of the guts of what we do and how we're able to get there. So the first piece is that not only are we able to do all this forecasting, but we actually submit all the POs and we do all the hard manual processes to be able to send those kinds of orders to the vendors. And then we literally don't charge the store for anything that doesn't sell. So how does this break down? And this is basically, by the way, this slide right here is the pitch to grocery stores. This is why we have over 3,000 grocers across the country that use Shelf Engine, is because if you look at the left, this is the cost of waste to a grocery store before they use Shelf. So there you can see that they bought an item for $6.50. They had some waste, and that waste cost them about $1.50. And so their effective cost is actually $8. So even though they're selling that item for $10, and you'd think that they were making a profit of the delta between $10 and $6.50, they're actually making the profit of $10 to $8 because of all that waste. When Shelf Engine steps in, we say we will guarantee you better results. And so we're going to charge you a fee of $1, which is way less than the waste that you're incurring. So you're going to make more money. Now, it's a pretty wild idea to essentially go and say, hey, industry, not only are we going to outperform you and have the software, but we're going to be able to do this at really big scale and be able to guarantee it with some very large dollars, right? Now, we came into the industry and we essentially said, we can do this, and we've done it at very large scale. And so you ask yourself, okay, why can we do this given that we've kind of guaranteed the sales? And why can't you just kind of apply the same software to the grocer's CAOs to go and solve this? And so let me take you through that real quick, and hopefully that'll be a good understanding in terms of how we function. But the first piece is in terms of the data that's collected. The data that's collected is that very hard to get what's actually happening in the store. So obviously for our forecast, you need sales data, delivery data, promotions data, and then we get all sorts of exogenous data, like school schedules and weather and so forth. But the really big key part that gives us this advantage is what we have for in-store data. We have a field team across the country that visits each one of our stores and collects some specific data about that store. How well are they adhering to planograms? Are they getting shorted? Are the shelf lives adhering to what they're actually saying there? And the most important one that drives basically the most amount of waste in grocery stores is FIFO, is the fact that you have some items that are that have the longest shelf life that are in front of some of the items that have the shortest that are about to expire. And we collect all this data and it trains our AI. And in the process of training our AI with this kind of data, we're able to radically outperform any sort of other automated solution out there to figure out the right amount to order. And that's how we're able to guarantee such results. Now, what this does is it goes into the place that we've invested the most in terms of our forecasting, which is inventory. And if you think about forecasting in terms of kind of the three key parts, so you have to forecast sales and you have to forecast inventory, and then you have to optimize given all the things that are happening in the supply chain. You would think that forecasting sales is the hardest part, but it's actually not. It's forecasting inventory. It's trying to figure out how much product is actually in the store without essentially having to count all these 40,000 SKUs every day. And we do something that is quite state of the art, which is we do a simulated inventory forecasting. And the way to imagine this is that we think of all the different possible permutations of the amount of inventory that is on the shelf, given all the possible different constraints. And this runs a simulations thousands and thousands of times for a single SKU, for a single store. And we can find the most likely scenario of how much product is actually in there. And it gets trained with all this data that we bring in, right? Because of that, then we get extremely accurate. So here you can see in this graph where the blue lines, kind of the top there, the teal, are kind of the morning inventory. And then the white lines are the end of day inventory. And the red dots are the actual collected inventory. And you can see that we've done a very good job of predicting where that is. If you take what that store predicts in terms of inventory, it's not even on this page. They're completely off, right? This has given us a massive advantage on that front. This comes into our overall goal as an organization to get to achieving the perfect order. The perfect order is defined as having all the needed demand so that everybody gets exactly what they want in the store. There's literally nothing out of stock that you'd want to buy, with zero waste. That is the goal. That is where we want to get to. And I know I'm running short on time, so I'll conclude fairly quickly here on a couple last things that have been very hard for the grocery industry to solve, and I think are exciting things that we're able to do. The first one is cold start mapping, which is the idea that you always have these new items that continually are getting introduced into a store. The actual process of launching those items with the right kinds of forecasts is really quite complicated. Here's a fun example. I was going to take you guys through it, but I unfortunately don't think I have the time. This happens at a very massive scale across the SKUs.
I think you do have time if you'd like to go ahead with that.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, that'd be fun. Here's basically what happens is stores are continuing to add new SKUs in certain categories. But the only way that you can really figure out what you're going to do in terms of this, and we're talking like massive production, right? Like one of our largest customers is Kroger. Now, if you want to run a new item, and Kroger likes to do this across the nation, you're literally talking about 2,700 stores, facilities that are across the country that need to produce in sync to be able to produce here, right? So you need to be able to have forecasts before this item even sells in the store to bring it in, right? And so this is an example of an 8-ounce regular guacamole. And we're able to create training models to learn off of all the different other types of guacamole in the store. Where stores fail and have some potentially big issues is they don't understand where those items will correlate to all the other types of items that are there. So here, for example, this item has learned from the 8-ounce spicy guacamole as well as the 12-ounce regular guacamole, but it said, hey, guacamole chips actually don't correlate properly to the same sales rates. So learn from these things. And that's where we're able to deploy purchase orders and do the forecasting appropriately for literally 2,700 stores, basically overnight, whenever they want to launch new items. This is a power that grocers just haven't been able to do. Finally, on the forecasting front, which is quite interesting, is that you need to be able to have some really strong guardrails. And although our AI works 98.7% of the time, there are issues that arise. Some of them that are self-detected, some of them that we hear from the stores. Could be, hey, this store just caught on fire, or a fridge broke down, or the truck that was going to the store wasn't able to make it, isn't going to have any product. There's manual intervention that needs to happen there. Or sometimes through our data, we're able to detect that something is actually happening, that there's a real issue, and then it's escalated to someone. Of all the orders that are run through, 1.3% of the orders are reviewed by someone who's actually on our operations team. It's pretty cool. It kind of looks like NASA Launch Center, where you get screens and all this data and all this stuff that's happening, and they're just looking at these SKUs for the stores. We're hoping to reduce that percentage, although there will always be some portion of that that just from a grocery store shutting down for a day that you just can't deal with just pure AI. So I'll finish on this, as I'm guessing there'll be some questions. We've released some really cool case studies, some of the things that we've done across the industry. The first thing that I just want to brag about for a little bit is the fact that we've been able to reduce food waste significantly. And we put this into all sorts of different kinds of metrics, but at the company, we like to measure the number of semi-trucks that would be full of food that never actually needed to go to waste. I always think about that in terms of the volume of product that would actually land in a landfill, and how big of an amount of food that would be. And that's really exciting to us. The cool thing is this number today already feels small, as we're going to reach almost 10 times this year. So we'll be in this really cool position going forward on this front. Because I've been talking for a little while, I won't go through too many of these, but you can find many of these online. We've got case studies talking about how much food waste we're able to reduce. We also have this really cool thing, which I did not focus on, which is that because we are able to enable more product being on the shelf at any given point, we're able to increase sales in a meaningful way for many of our customers, as well as because we're automating a lot of this work, we're able to reduce the number of hours in the store, which is extremely important today, given that stores can barely hire. And then we've got these published white papers on our site, if you ever want to go kind of deeper on this front, which talk about what we've been able to do for certain specific categories that are there. I'll conclude with this before we jump into questions, and I'm always very open about this. This is my email address, and I like to give it out for a couple of reasons. One, we are recruiting like crazy. Would be so honored to have you eventually join our team as a local Seattleite. If you have any other questions, or hey, you work at a grocery store and you want to talk to us, but here's my email address if you ever want to reach out to us and chat. So with that, thank you so much. I see that there's some questions that are building up in the chat. Alyssa, what is kind of your preferred means of me addressing questions, or
That's a great question, Stefan. And yeah, we've had sort of a side conversation going on. It's been really great for folks in the course who have been involved in grocery retail, answering some questions from maybe folks who are unaware of what goes on behind the scenes. So usually what we do is we have Bridget, who is the teaching assistant for the course, jump in and kind of serve as the voice for the questions that are coming in the chat. And if there are students who want to ask live, you can feel free to do that as well. Just raise your hand and Bridget can also help facilitate you asking live.
Awesome.
Bridget, have you been able to review some of the comments?
Yes, unfortunately, I was fixing the technical difficulties, so I missed the first half of this lecture, but I see that in the chat, there was some wonderful questions that then folks were answering who had experience working in grocery stores. And the first question I'm seeing that was not answered was, where does the food get used up at shelf, or do you partner with other organizations to repurpose the food?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's a really interesting part of that question that I'll uncover a little bit, which is that the majority of grocery stores produce all this waste, and they actually don't know how much waste they're producing, and they actually don't really know where it goes. We are in a position today where majority of our partners, for a variety of factors, are still the ones who are dealing with where the waste is going. There is, I think, a very big opportunity for us to work with partners to get that waste in the right places. A lot of large grocery stores today have programs to essentially compost that waste or send it to be animal feed or try to find some more productive uses versus going straight to a landfill. The reality of it is that the adherence to that is quite low. And so we want to step in at some point here to be able to make an impact. We're still early in terms of our journey there. And we're hoping that it's definitely gonna be a multi-pronged approach. We're hoping that we're gonna have a major impact there. But to this day, our customers, say like, you know, Kroger, Target, Whole Foods, et cetera, they're still the ones who are dealing with the food at the end of the day that is wasted.
Awesome, thanks so much. And I see a hand from David. David, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, hi. I think there's still one more question in the chat before I raise my hand. The one from Lane.
Oh, perfect. I wasn't sure if your question was a follow-up or not. Great. Lane said, are there plans to expand to other types of retailers, either more like clothing retailers or smaller scale things like farms?
Yeah, really good question. So there's a couple places that we're getting pulled into on the retail front that are really quite interesting. The first one that we've seen a lot of interest from are actual media publications that do things like magazines or newspapers, because I guess they have a very specific shelf life on those fronts. And the other one that we've seen is from pharmaceuticals and hospitals, because they also have very short shelf lives on things. I never knew this. I've actually sat in now in several conversations with hospital executives who told me about how skin grafts have 10-day shelf life. I would have never known. Today, those are really interesting problems because of the traction that we have in the grocery industry and how big it is. We will likely stay very focused on grocery and what's happening in the food systems. And those are very specific problems that we dealt with. The one place we are expanding more and more, which is quite fascinating, is in the realm of starting to forecast up the supply chain. Because if you think about the pressures that the grocery stores have put onto the vendors, is that they've essentially said, hey, you need to be able to submit orders, say, within a day's time. So I'm gonna make an order today, it's Friday, and I expect the delivery to be tomorrow. Well, let's say you are delivering lettuce. That farmer could have been growing the lettuce 2 months ago to be able for it to be prepared by then. And so every step of the supply chain up the way will create a bunch of buffer to make sure that store is able to make an order and have lettuce delivered tomorrow. That's a really big problem. And because of our forecasting, we can start forecasting up the supply chain. So we started doing that and used our exact same model of essentially guaranteeing the orders up the supply chain such that we can essentially say, hey, farmer, this is how much lettuce that we're going to guarantee we're going to buy from you in 45 days, 60 days. That's going to go through the process. That's a really, there's a lot more to be talked about specifically there, but we expect that that's going to be kind of our growth as time goes on.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. David, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. Hi, Stefan. Thanks for your time today. I found your company like really interesting. I just had a couple questions on the like AI ML portion or aspect of the company. So I was kind of curious, just the last comment that you made where you talked about trying to forecast up the supply chain. I was wondering currently, do you have to enter into like any agreement with like the suppliers of the grocery stores to help in your forecasting, or do you kind of deal with that like on an ad hoc basis? I guess, for example, say like one supplier runs into an issue, or like, you know, recently like the past closed down, like say that happens, do they have to communicate that with you and then your forecast gets updated real time? Or is that something that it hits the grocery stores first and then it goes into the forecasting? If that, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely makes sense. And it's a really good question. So when we come in to start managing orders at a grocery store, by definition, those vendors are no longer vendors of the grocer and they're our vendors. So we actually have to know all those things, and we know them way before the grocer actually knows them. So we are the ones who pay the vendors, and the vendors are now in contract with us. And that is fundamental to the success of what we've been able to produce, because I didn't go through this in terms of kind of the great list of issues in terms of food waste, but vendors have a lot to contribute on that front, from kind of poor data and lack of adherence to contractual norms. And so we've been able to step in and make a really big impact on that. So the vendors are actually a key part of the solution.
Got it, thank you. I just have one more question, if I may.
Yeah.
I was just curious, like more about the ML side now. I know like in other industries or in other applications, like one criticism of ML is like, I forgot the exact term, but there's something like data bias. Like for example, in the incarceration system, when we've tried to apply ML, it uses like previously biased results to, you know, make a system. So you kind of reinforce those. So I was just wondering, do you run into any of those problems when you try to create your system, or is it not as much of an issue because you're taking more just these like hard, like supply and demand type numbers and using those to forecast?
Oh, bias is a really, really prominent and difficult problem in data science overall. And we think of bias, you know, in a general way, a little bit differently than it's actually term means specifically in terms of data science. But you have a lot of issues in terms of bias that you need to correct for in data science to be able to make all the models work, because what you are essentially building your models to go to the perfect scenario creates inherently bias in that process. And so for us, for example, the biggest issue is reducing the bias towards out of stocks, because inherently, if you think about it, you want to have this full beautiful shelf that if you think about it just in a purely mathematical point of view, or actually a really good analogy to it is, imagine you're just ordering groceries online. It comes from a warehouse. You don't care how that warehouse looks. You just care that you got your groceries delivered to your house. But for some reason, when you go to the store, you really care how that store looks. Those are the kinds of biases that you need to take into consideration in terms of the models. It's a really good question. We could actually talk about bias for hours, or at least we do in data science here, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful.
Absolutely.
Amazing. I see another question from Renee in the chat. How long has it taken to develop the AI you have now? Do you have any improvements you are currently working on?
Yeah, good question. So we started a company over 5 years ago, so 5.5 years ago. It is, now we have a team of about 20 or so data scientists, mostly PhDs. Data science today, anybody who's trying to build ML or AI is looking for data scientists. So it is a very competitive world out there, trying to find all these PhDs to work on it. We are advancing the AI day after day in a major way. So because we take on the financial risk of what we do, the better we are able to forecast, the more money we make, right? So we are heavily incentivized to continue to make the AI better and better. So we invest in it heavily, and we will continue to do so. Today, in terms of teams, that is the highest priority team that we're recruiting for. And so to answer your question in the most simple terms, yes, there's heavy advancement in the AI front.
Wonderful. Thanks for that. And I see the next question from Sophie. How long does it take to switch the store to shelf? Is it hard for them to get used to it?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we inherently built our system to be really, really easy. So the majority of the CAOs that are out there, if you guys can remember how I talked about like those different ordering solutions to CAOs, CAO implementation will take easily over a year and usually about 2 years. So if you're a grocery store and you want to implement a new CAO, you're literally looking at a 2-year implementation before you have any results. With Shelf, we can launch within 2 to 4 weeks. And the reason that we can do that is because all we need to do is essentially hook up our data pipe to your data pipe. So we go to the store and we say, hey, we need to start getting all this sales data. And then we have all the other data and all the infrastructure and everything ready to go to be able to do that. That means that you can start seeing results right away in terms of making your financials better. Now, the second part of your question, which is how long does it take the stores to get used to it, is a really funny question, because the training that we have for their stores is we come in and we say, hey, you're no longer using your CAO. Your IT team is literally going to turn off your CAO. And they're like, what? I'm not in control anymore. And even though the AI will do a much better job of ordering than they will, it is a loss of control, and that's a little bit difficult. And so we keep thinking about how do we train stores to essentially say, it's kind of like your self-driving car. I know this personally when, I got a Tesla and I was like, put it in self-driving mode. I was like, oh God, this can't possibly be, right? Is that same kind of feel that a grocery store has. And so that is essentially the biggest kind of piece we have with people getting used to using Shelf.
Absolutely, that makes perfect sense. I see another question from Denby. Who picks where to order from, your company or the store who hires you?
Yeah.
And Bridget and Stefan, I think unfortunately this will be our last question. Stefan, we collect questions and comments from students for all of our seminar presenters, and we'll share them back with you just so you have a sense of kind of where your talk made an impact. And in the meantime, let's take Denby's question. Sorry about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the answer to the question is that we do not pick the suppliers. The grocer picks the suppliers. We have a very important line, which is that we work for the retailer. And we also don't want to create bias such that vendors would try to work us one direction or the other. So the the retailer picks who the vendors are going to be, and we work on behalf of them. So, but with that, I'll say I was really grateful to be able to come and speak to you all today. Thank you, Alyssa and Bridget, for coordinating and having me here. This is really quite wonderful. And I'll go ahead and pass it off back to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stefan. The class can't thank you enough. It was really fascinating to hear really about a systems level innovation that's creating such a wide scale impact at the grocery retail level. And really great to see some of the students in class who have had experience in retail also being able to kind of echo the complexity of what it's really like, behind the scenes. And yeah, we're excited to follow the progress of the company. And this talk really puts into perspective the really gargantuan impact that this type of technology can have, especially when we're looking at such a large part of the problem of food rescue, which happens at the retail level. So thank you so much for sharing more about Shelf Engine and also your experience as well.
Likewise. Nice. Thank you, Alyssa.
Thank you.